Welcome to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss an episode. So as we look towards the future, many organizations are starting their return to workplace policies. And today, I'm so delighted to have Dr. Julianna Hynes. Julianna is a global leadership development and advancement strategist, coach, facilitator, and author. And she is known for her expertise in women's leadership. Welcome, Julianna, today.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy. Pleasure to be here.
I am so excited. I know this has been a long time in the scheduling, so I'm so happy you're here.
Yes, it has.
And I'd like to focus today's podcast on reentry as women return to the workplace. And I know that you wrote a pretty amazing book called Leading on Purpose, The Black Woman's Guide to Shattering the Glass Ceiling. And I guess my first question is, what inspired you to write the book?
What inspired me, Wendy, was my own early career experiences. I went into the workforce right after graduating with my bachelor's. Thought I was going to enter the workforce as this professional and go on to grad school and have the degrees and all of that and emerge as someone with knowledge, and decided to do what I thought was natural, which was get married instead. And, a year into the marriage, I was pregnant. And around the same time I found out I was pregnant, my husband at the time told me he didn't want to be married anymore. So I had to go back home. Thankfully, I had parents and a home to go back to, and I had to reset as a single mother, as a young woman, as a Black woman. And I entered into the workforce not as this, professional as I thought I would be, either going to medical school or getting a master's in something, but I went in to get a job because I had to take care of myself and my son. And I started out at a container terminal here in the Bay Area. And the individuals I worked with, particularly the leaders, they were mostly older, white, male, military backgrounds, and literally made probably 4 times as much money as I did. So their wives got to stay at home and be with the kids and do whatever their wives like to do. I think there were a lot of assumptions and labels heaped on me as a result of that. And there wasn't anyone in the workplace that looked like me in leadership role. There weren't any ERGs or mentorship programs or anything like that. And so I went back to school finally and decided to get my master's, and really got intrigued with leadership and leadership development, and particularly for women. How can women advance their careers and get into those more senior roles? And from there, I just got really passionate about it, decided to study it a little bit more for my doctorate. And that's where I wrote my dissertation on successful Black women leaders. So from all of that experience and that research, as well as through the work I've been doing as an executive coach, the book was born out of all of those different touch points for particularly Black women as they advance in leadership. However, it's really for any woman or even any champion or ally. I just decided to target it to Black women because there's not a lot out there for professional Black women.
I'll tell you, that is quite the story. And, I am a white woman, and I can understand a lot of what you're talking about, starting my career 30 years ago in pharma, where there were not a lot of women walking around. So some of the stories in your book and some of the tips are certainly applicable, broad-based for sure. WLH, we focus on the human side, right? Around retaining talented women. And we've done a lot of research in looking at what are the factors around talent retention, and they look different for women, especially women of color versus men. And I'm curious, as most organizations are now having this return to the workplace initiative, and we see that often that more men are going to be able to return to the workplace, where some women are going to stay back. And what I'm curious about is, what do you think are some of the leading factors to help retain talented women at this point in time? What's going to be important?
Well, you've probably heard this. People don't quit organizations, they quit their managers and they leave.
Always.
And so I think the manager plays a really pivotal part in retaining top talent of all, walks of life and backgrounds and all of that. Particularly for women, it's important that their leader be flexible and consider that, not just for women anymore, actually, because I was doing a presentation on this and I made a generalization that women might not be able to do, say, network after hours because they have to go home and, make sure the kids are all taken care of and homework and all that good stuff. And an older woman stood up and she said, well, that's not my situation. And, that could be a man's situation. And she was absolutely right. But it's the consideration of the lion's share of the work at home still falls on the woman or the wife or the mother, whomever she is. And so being mindful and considerate of that when leaders are giving opportunities for networking, maybe instead of after hours to do it during the day or earlier in the day, but definitely during work hours rather than like a breakfast engagement or a after hours drinks. A lot of women in particular still can't do that because I know for me, I had to be there to get the kids off to school and make sure they had breakfast. And I had to be there to get them to different practices and events and make sure the homework was done. So I think flexibility is very key for the people leaders to keep in mind that everybody's situation might be a little bit different.
One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is really empathetic leadership. And because that rose is pretty critical during the pandemic, I think that the same concepts are going to be important as you move forward. And one of the things that we know is we lost over 5 million women from the workforce last year. Pretty devastating if you think about it. And you were talking about people don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers, and that's absolutely true. And a couple of years ago, we conducted another study looking at women and women of color to see if our retention predictor model held. And what we found, Julianna, and this is what I really want to talk to you about, is it's very important to have a very good manager-employee relationship. But we found 2 other factors that were different from when we looked at a male population or a mixed population. That being, one, that there was a culture that was supportive and meaningful. And the second is that criteria for career advancement and development was explicit. Because many times, as you said, women are doing their job and then they're running to their other commitments, and the hanging out on a golf course or spending times after hours weren't really there. So having transparency around opportunities and then being able to find sponsors to really lean into were important. I'm curious, what are you saying and how do you feel about that? And then what I'd like for you to be able to do is share, fast forward, what pieces of advice would you give to leaders as women return to the workplace?
I've had the opportunity to talk on this as my book was released last year. And a couple of factors I find are key. First, I came up with the SASSY model, if you will. The acronyms are for professional savvy, support, accountability, and strategy. And so it's important that we take ownership and responsibility of our own careers. So as women are going back into the workforce and they're thinking about advancement, really being aware of what are my strengths, what are my development opportunities, and how do I get those met? But then to your point, the managers, the sponsors, mentors, coaches, it takes a village, right? And one thing I've heard it called is like a board of directors, having a group of people that are there to support you and help you navigate through some of those individual challenges, and that transparency of advancement and the opportunity to gain visibility, and not only visibility to the organization, but to more senior leaders so that they can see, how good you are and what work you can do is extremely important. Accountability is important because we often, if I don't tell somebody I'm going to do something, it gives me more room not to do it if I change my mind. Finally, a strategy. The women I've interviewed were they were very ambitious and wanted to advance, but there wasn't a lot of strategy around it. And they often said they could only speculate. Had they been more strategic, how much further they would have been able to go.
I want to comment on your last statement, because when I think about development, to your point, I believe that an individual has 100% responsibility for their own personal development, making a plan, finding the support, et cetera. But as a manager of that employee, I have 100% responsibility for supporting their development. So this is not a 50-50. It's I have to really lean in, to your point, understand my development needs, build my plan, and then reach out for that support from my manager who has responsibility for supporting that, as well as looking a little broader and wider in other places in the organization or outside of an organization, to your board of directors concept, to support my development. So it's like it's taking the village and viewing my career journey very strategically is what you're speaking about.
From a manager's perspective, first and foremost, to sit down and have a conversation with the individual, because we're all different, right? We all have different needs. We all have different strengths. We are all looking to achieve different things. But, first sitting down, having a conversation, helping your direct report to strategize, really listening for what it is that they need and how can you as the manager help them meet that need, and then extend and open up not only your knowledge set and your toolbox, but your network, and ensuring that you're giving that individual the visibility and exposure, the opportunities to practice, and providing that safety net as well. We all stumble and fall. So making it okay to make mistakes and learning from them and getting back up and trying again.
Like the whole fast failure with support. We're now in May. Most organizations, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, are saying people are going to be returning to the workplace. Some are going to have flexibility come July. Some are talking about September. But it puts a little bit of strain, or a significant amount of strain, on the person who's the primary caregiver at home. And I'm curious, as we close out today's podcast, how can and should employers and managers re-engage with their employees? In particular, how do they re-recruit their talent and re-engage them so they can have a successful transition back to the workplace?
Great question. I really think it's thinking of whoever that individual you're trying to engage in, what is important to them. Again, it goes back to asking questions and listening for the answer. I firmly believe that if you're passionate about the work that you're doing and you're receiving that support and you're getting opportunities, there's the engagement right there. So it's up to the leaders to find out, well, what do these women want to do coming back to the workforce? And if they can't do that, how can I create a space that they feel like they are contributing and they're getting something out of it? And then back to support, as you said, how can I best support them? It might be flexibility. She might have to work from home 3 days a week, or she might have to fully work from home, but giving those opportunities to that talent to have say in how they return to work, I think would be important.
I'll tell you, if we learned anything from the pandemic, we can work pretty effectively remotely. I want to thank you so much for your time today. I'm so impressed with your background and the kind of work you do, and I think it's really meaningful. And thank you for taking the time to share some lessons learned with our audience.
My pleasure, and I'm glad we were finally able to do this. I think you're doing great work for women in the community, so keep it up. Thank you.
A few key takeaways from today. One of them is to make sure that as women return to the workplace, to make sure that their managers spend the time to understand what their needs are, their concerns are, and find a solution that works for them as well as the individual. And also, the second tip is own your own career journey and your own development. And make sure that as you do that, you have a strategic plan around it and you engage your board of directors for support. And third and lastly, is to make sure we bring the sense of humanness and empathy as people return to the workplace, and make sure that we all pay attention to everybody having varying degrees of needs and do our best to support one another. Did I miss any, Dr. Julianna?
You did great. No, thank you. That sounded good.
All right, well then, this is Dr. Wendy Heckelman. I want to wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next week.